Michael Leggett and Cris Eugster are the co-founders of EverGreen, a company making investing in solar projects easier, faster, and more impactful. These guys are ridiculously smart and passionate, each bringing different strengths to the company. Cris with deep experience in the energy industry, and Michael was a product design lead at Facebook and Google both. Today, they're tackling the question, what if investing in solar energy projects was as easy as buying stock on the Robinhood app? So that's exactly what EverGreen is tackling. Today, they're working with companies and real estate developers that buy and sell renewable energy certificates. Don't know what those are? Well, we dig deep into that. We also dig deep into what is additionality and why should you care? Jacob, what was our chat like with these two gentlemen?
Ty, it was jam-packed and super interesting. To be clear, the solar investing they're making more accessible is in solar fields, not solar panels on roofs. Solar fields is where you take open areas and you add extra solar into the grid. Don't worry, we're going to dig into all of this today. We're also going to dig into why do companies buy RECs, renewable energy certificates, in the first place? Why isn't it easy for companies to do this? And finally, what's it like having extremely tall twin sons? We're going to find out today in Climate Mayhem. Mayhem on, Ty.
Mayhem on.
Hey guys, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
It's so nice to have you. Ty and I were doing a ton of research. There's such a body of knowledge in what you guys are doing, and actually a lot of the content that you guys have made too was pretty cool. I thought we'd start off the chat with a question for you, Cris. What's it like having twin sons? What's surprisingly awesome?
I mean, it's just surprisingly awesome just to have my two boys. It's all we did. We didn't have any more after that, so that's all we know. But we were very tight as a family. We go to the same sports. We'd always go to the same soccer field or same baseball or a school event. So we were always together. That kind of was special. Like we're a tight family. We love each other, and I think the twinness is a cool thing to have someone else that is. I had a younger sister, but to have someone who's almost like your doppelganger, just like right there, it's pretty cool. I can't fully relate to, but they're identical twins, but they're also very different and very unique in their and who they are, and we love them. And that's a big part of what we're trying to do here at EverGreen. We want to make this place a better place for our kids, our grandkids, future generations, and it all ties together for us.
Very cool. Yeah. And you come from a family of tall people. You're pretty tall.
Yeah.
Are you 6'4", 6'5"?
Yeah, 6'4". I think that's about where I'm at. And
in the morning.
Yeah, in the morning, exactly.
Yeah.
I think my mother's brother played basketball for Brazil. My mom's from Brazil. My dad's from Austria, from Europe. And so I'm actually a first generation American. They came over in their 20s. But my mother's younger brother played ball professionally for Brazil. And wow. So I love to play basketball. I'm not good at it at all, but I love to get out there and play. And my two boys play ball up at RPI. And so that's a big part of our life as well.
Amazing. And I imagine a lot of people ask if you can dunk. Can you? I think I saw that your sons can. Can you?
My sons can. I think at my sort of peak, I was able to dunk maybe a tennis ball, barely.
Okay.
Ooching it over
just
with my
slipping
fingers.
it in.
Just slipping it in. But no, never with a basketball. But my boys can, and so I guess that next generation always takes it up a level.
Yeah. I too actually am a first generation American. Both my parents are from Czech Republic.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
And he's also
and
a
I'm
tall guy.
I also am.
Okay.
I'm 6'6". Yeah.
Wow. Did you play basketball or?
I tried. I didn't keep going. I ended up skateboarding.
Oh wow.
Like pretty quickly just transition into that, which surprisingly is a great sport to do when you're tall because you can bigger range of motion. You can pop bigger ollies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Very cool.
Thanks. Yeah. Oh, and then I got a question for Michael now. Michael, what is bad design? I saw that you talked about this in your company. It was Simplify. Is that right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. My little side hustle. Yeah. I mean, I think that, I had a design manager. So my background or much of my career was in leading design teams, and on big products and big companies. And so I had a design manager once that said, there's no rule that can't be broken in the right way. And so I think, what is bad design? There's some subjectivity to it. There's some objectivity to it. I think also, like, what is design? Is it just the look of something? Is it how it works, and the function? And so I think that is a big question. And, I have my own kind of mental framework for what I think constitutes good design and bad design. I think, but I think sometimes it's, bad design can be anything from, you could have like the most beautiful car ever, but like, let's say, they're not reliable at all and they keep breaking down. Like, that's a badly designed car. And you could say it's gorgeous, but it's badly designed. And likewise, you could have a car that's not much to look at that like is just absolutely a beast in reliability and, always starts, always works, takes a beating. And I think to some extent, we will often come to see that as more beautiful because it works so well, and I think of like the old Volvos in the 90s or the old, and there's also some amount of like nostalgia and different things too, or the old, small Toyota pickup trucks or, so, it's a mix of what it looks like, how it works. Does it solve a problem? Does it really serve a need? Does it do it well? Does it kind of meet the expectations you have and exceed them in some areas? Kind of one of my other pieces of philosophy of products that tend to be seen as designed really well, really exceptional, tend to do something, some part of what it does is just way better than what's out there, or it's solving something that just, it does something that isn't really done out there at all. But, I think there's also some of the core pieces of design is around kind of, is it intuitive to use? Can I use it without a manual, without instruction? Is it kind of obvious what it does? Is it obvious how to use it? Does it fit into my life easily and naturally? Those kinds of things. And so if it's not doing those things, I think it can be, you could easily make a case for it being poorly designed. And the last thing I'll say is sometimes something is poorly designed because it's not designed for you. And so it works well, it's really well designed. It's not meant for you. It's for someone else. Stairs are great design. They're horrible if you are in a wheelchair.
Yeah. Right.
So, it's a complex question, but it's fun to kind of riff on.
Is there a product or a invention that exemplifies it? What maybe when you explain it to other people and you're like, let me give you an example of my mental framework around this.
Of what's, I've got all, well, so one of the last things I did, I was at Google for 10 years. And one of the last things I did at Google was there was a whole initiative built up around product excellence and what makes it, trying to kind of improve product excellence. And so I asked some of the people running that program, have we defined product excellence? Have we defined what is excellent product? And they were like, well, no. I was like, well, can we do that? And so I got roped into basically co-leading, defining what product excellence was. And so it was kind of a part-time thing, and both coming up with a framework and then trying to pitch it and sell it to a bunch of people internally. And so I ended up building a framework for what is product excellence. And I think good design is part of what makes a product excellent. But to answer your question of an example, we had an example for each of, so what we ended up was 3 pillars and 3 kind of categories under each pillar of what makes product excellence. And so we had an example for each one of those of what was a great example and what was a bad example. So one of my favorites, I don't know, a whole bunch of them, but Google Glasses, I think, is a great example of what I would call a bad design, because it was kind of a solution in search of a problem. It's kind of, it was just raw technology. What is this? It's a computer on your face. Cool. What's it do? I don't know. This is the next platform, right? The developers are going to figure it out. It's going to be wonderful. And because they didn't really latch onto a clear need that they were addressing, they didn't design around that need. And so arguably the best and worst part of Google Glass was the camera, right? All these kinds of privacy issues and stuff. But when you talk to people that are
Right.
using Google Glass, one of the things they loved is I've got this camera at all times. I don't have to get it out. I don't have to touch it. I just say, take a picture, it takes it. I'm getting all these shots I wouldn't have otherwise gotten. They're really poor quality. The videos aren't great. And so again, wasn't really designed around that. And there's all these privacy concerns and whatnot. So you compare that to something that you probably wouldn't obviously compare it to, which is like the GoPro camera, which is a potentially wearable camera, but they designed it around it being a great wearable camera, right? And then they also designed it for extreme athletes in the beginning, which are people that want to record their antics and other people want to see their antics. Right. And so it's only being done in situations like someone snowboarding down a hill, or like there's no one going, oh my gosh, are you recording me? There, oh my gosh, did you record that? Right. And the camera quality was great. The build quality was great. The battery life, it was designed for a task. And so it was well designed. So I think Google Glass somewhat flopped in the beginning because in my view, my opinion is it wasn't clearly designed to solve a clear problem. And that's kind of the first thing I think of a well-designed product. First and foremost is built around solving an actual problem.
Excellent. Okay. Thank you. That was
amazing. Great example. No, that was great.
No, we loved it. We loved it.
I loved the example of, are you taking a picture of me? And you better have gotten that shot.
Right,
like that's such a great difference. I love that.
Different frame. Guys, what got you interested in climate sustainability space? Maybe said a different way. When did you start thinking about these issues? Each of you worked in this space before EverGreen. I imagine you're probably thinking about this well before even those previous jobs.
Yeah, I'll kick this one off. I've been in kind of the energy space here for a while. I was a double A in college. I did my PhD in electrical engineering. Ended up working at McKinsey in the tech and the energy space. So that kind of got me into energy. I'm from Texas. Texas is a big energy state. But my first really strong pivot or foray into climate was working for Mayor Bill White in Houston. That was 2007 through 2009. He wanted to think about energy differently from Texas and a Houston perspective. Houston's always been the oil and gas capital of the world, and we wanted to kind of make it the clean energy capital of the world. Let's include clean energy there. So I took a position on his staff.
And he was the former mayor of Houston. Is that right?
He was former mayor of Houston. He's actually a pretty interesting background. He was either a deputy undersecretary, I forgot, in the DOE under the Clinton administration. So he was pretty high up on the DOE. He was mayor of Houston. He ran for governor on the Democrat ticket against Rick Perry. He didn't make it, but Texas, I guess, wasn't ready at the time for that. And he's also been a successful businessman. So he's really admired him a lot for kind of wanting to kind of change things for the better. High integrity guy. Really loved working for him. But I was essentially the first chief sustainability officer for the city of Houston. So that got me into the energy policy piece. We did a deal where we took Houston to the number one city in terms of greening up all its facilities, doing sort of a PPA with a wind farm, and kind of sleeving it with a pretty complex transaction. But the EPA had sort of a top green institutions that had Whole Foods on there. Intel and City of Houston was like right up there. I forgot exactly what number it was, but that was a big deal to show that leadership from a city perspective. We also did some pretty innovative things on building codes, raising those bars, energy efficiency. We had a pretty interesting weatherization programs where we would go neighborhood by neighborhood and weatherize whole blocks and kind of set that up as like a manufacturing line instead of dispatching crews like on a first come first serve across the city, getting stuck in traffic. We would just run crews by neighborhood to tighten those houses up. And we also measured the back end. So once we did those retrofits, what was the impact? How much, what was the savings on the kilowatt hours, on the bill savings, documented that. So, did a lot there. It was super exciting in terms of sort of connecting with the community, making a difference. And so when he ran for governor, I took a job in San Antonio with CPS Energy. CPS Energy is the largest public utility on the gas and electric side. serve about 2 million customers, vertically integrated. So they've got
Wow.
power plants, nuclear plants,
Wow.
coal, gas, and the wire side of the business, and then serve the retail customer. And I started as a chief sustainability officer for the utility there, and kind of ultimately got into operation. I was there as a chief operating officer over the last 5 years there. But we did a ton of stuff. Like we retired 2 coal plants. We stood up, over 500 megawatts of solar. We did this landmark economic development deal with OCI Solar, which is a big Korean conglomerate, to basically structure PPAs where we were taking the offtake, but they had to stand up jobs. So they actually stood up solar manufacturing there, which actually exists to this date.
Wow.
And I think at some point there were, close to 1,000 jobs, $1 billion of economic development impact. And what's interesting is, some of that went through some hard times as China was ramping up solar production. It was hard to, build factories here domestically, but they weathered through that. And now Mission Solar, which is the factory that's in San Antonio building solar, is the belle of the ball in terms of, you want to have domestic contact with this new climate legislation bill. So super exciting time for me in terms of being on that energy transition. What I found is we have to go even faster, and it's incumbents are going to play a role in that, but being kind of on the more disruptive side, on the venture side, I feel is where I want to try to make a difference. And so I teamed up with Pioneer Square Labs here. I know we'll get into a little bit more of the investment and how EverGreen all started, but teamed up with Michael here as co-founder of EverGreen. And we wanted to, build a great company on climate, for profit, and from a capitalistic perspective. And but mostly important is to have an impact on climate. So, and we'll get into this a little more down the road. I think is I was really disheartened. Will we be able to get to even 2030 goals of getting to a 40% reduction in greenhouse gases? It just didn't feel like it. Now with this climate legislation that's played through, I think it feels like we've got some real momentum, real wind in the sails, and EverGreen just is at the tip of the spear in terms of making this happen. So we're super excited. Couldn't be in a better place, better team, and just trying to accelerate the energy transition.
No kidding.
Nice.
I was thinking exactly that too after the bill was passed. I thought about you guys and more companies, I don't know, feeling like they need to do this, and really just even hopefully regulation to make them do this. And then, Michael, what about you? What got you interested in the climate sustainability space? Where did it start?
Yeah, I would say as far as where it started, I think there were 2 events that were kind of big events, and I feel like they're kind of boring, or I feel like they're common events. I think one is seeing Al Gore's An Inconvenient Truth back in 06. I think that kind of really put it on my radar in a bigger way that wasn't on it until that time. I think that, a couple of years later, a year or 2 later, Obama gets elected, and there's kind of this sense of okay, phew, I can breathe a sigh of relief. This is going to get, addressed. And then kind of seeing it not really get addressed. And kind of, so there's kind of this slow, oh my gosh, this is a big deal. Okay, it's going to be fine. Oh my gosh, it's actually not really going to get addressed. And so this slowly ticking up of urgency where it's okay, that was a top 3 issue. Now it's a top 2 issue. Now it's by far my number 1 issue. And I would say it was my number 1 issue by the time the 2016 election kind of rolled around. And, I think with Trump's position on climate change, at least his public position is he doesn't really even think it's real. That kind of bumped things up a whole nother level. So at that time I was at Facebook, and within 24 hours of him getting elected, I basically made a commitment to become, to myself, to be a tri-vegetarian for 100 days, and figure out how to switch my career into working directly on climate, among a couple other small things. So I ended up sticking with both. I'm still been vegetarian. I don't even know what my last
it's not easy
meal was of meat. My wife is vegetarian, so I'm lucky.
Oh, there you go.
It's pretty easy for me. it wasn't a big sacrifice. I was born and raised a Texan, so I thought it would be a bigger sacrifice. But it was already easy, and it was easier than I expected it to be. And and then I switched. I eventually left Facebook, and I wasn't really sure. I'm not good at figuring out what's next while I'm in the current thing. So I left Facebook to go embark on my journey of figuring out, and that was about 4.5 years ago, of what is it to work on climate and where can I do that, and kind of learn by doing.
And that's when you started working at Nori shortly after.
Yeah, I tried a couple small things briefly, but I landed at Nori, where I ran product and eventually ran, supply and quantification and verification in one way or another. A lot of that stuff being done by partners externally, but trying to kind of run, trying to align things and launch their market, get their first farmer. They build a carbon removal marketplace around incentivizing regenerative agriculture practices. So enrolling our first, farmers, getting all their data, being able to quantify the impacts based on their changes, verify that with an external party, and then build a marketplace that issues credits and sells them, and then sell those credits. So that was a big lift. I was there for about 2 years, and then I did some consulting for another year and a half or so around some other players in the space, and then I decided I didn't want to work on nature-based solutions anymore. For a whole host of reasons. Wanted to try my hand at energy, and I've known the people behind Pioneer Square Labs since I actually almost joined Pioneer Square Labs when they got started. So I've kept in touch with Greg over the years, and he knew I was focused on climate and said, "Hey, you should talk to this guy, Chris. He's excited about space too." And so our powers combined, and then we've built up a great team. We've kind of been at it.
Let's dig in there, because that's a great segue. You guys have such a deep background in this space. I think there's a lot to even learn here about what EverGreen does for the average consumer. But let's start there. I mean, you guys obviously had this great connector here in the Northwest, which is Pioneer Square Labs. Talk us through some of those early ideas and how EverGreen kind of came around and came about.
Yeah, I'll kick it off again. Pioneer Square Labs, with Greg's leadership, wanted to do something kind of in this space. I think it was a combination of sort of energy and sort of fractionalization, like fractionalizing, into different markets, or other analogies that they were trying to play off of. They were looking at energy broadly, even sort of including things like RNG,
renewable natural gas.
Mm-hmm. And when I kind of connected with Greg, we talked about solar is it is such an interesting kind of technology. And I'm a utility guy. It correlates so well, at least in the South and Texas. Like when it's hot and ACs are going full load, solar is producing. So it correlates really well with demand. It is fairly predictable. Wind is a lot less predictable to forecast. Solar, again, if it's going to be a high pressure system over the state of Texas, solar is going to be shining and producing. And so for a variety of different reasons, it feels like a really good technology and piece of solving this energy puzzle. So we talked about how do we stand up more solar? How do we get consumers involved? Because part of this thing was fractionalizing, letting anyone bring capital or investments into renewable projects, really opening it up beyond kind of the big banks and Wall Street, and just democratizing the whole area of renewables. And so it was kind of a B2C play when we first kind of got out of the gate. And I think the challenge we found there is it is pretty complicated. There's a lot of sort of complex, bespoke project structuring and financing pieces of it. There's a lot of tax implications. So if you invest $1,000 or $100 into a solar system, I mean, our tagline was, buy a solar panel and get a return on it, and get a return and do good by the earth. So it had a lot of good elements to it. But it really kind of bogged down in terms of a lot of the complexity that still needs to be sorted out in solar, and which everyone's dealing with here. And so you invest a couple $100 into a panel, and then you got to have to deal with a K-1 with your tax returns next year. It just got complicated. And and there are companies that are in this space right now, and we could have made a business out of it, but we really wanted to have broad impact and have a much bigger play on the climate side. And so we did a pivot about in sort of April timeframe, about 3 or 4 months into it, to make it more of a B2B play. So instead of working with end consumers, let's work with companies. Companies have dollars. Their success has been a big part of the carbon footprint that we have today. They want to be more sustainable. There's SEC is kind of going down this path in terms of is climate a liability for these companies? How are they mitigating that? So now there's carbon disclosure rules. So there's a nice kind of a trend around corporates setting climate goals, carbon goals, scope 2 emissions 1, 2, and 3, and now not how do they actually achieve those goals? And so that was a space that we kind of pivoted into. So we are working with companies to actually take their goals and achieve them through real projects and standing up new solar. And we found it a much more scalable, faster way to stand up a lot more solar, which is kind of what we're all about. Solar plus storage. Storage is kind of playing in for us as well. So that's kind of where we're at. And that was kind of that was my version of the story. I don't know, Michael probably he's got his perspective, but yeah.
That's super helpful. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah,
go ahead.
Well, I'll have just a tiny bit of color. What's interesting is I think I talked to Greg about the fractional investment in renewable natural gas before y'all got connected, and I basically was like, yeah, I think this is I don't have anything to do with it. I don't think this is interesting.
Wow. Yeah.
And then Greg was like, okay, that's interesting. Thanks for the feedback. And then he pinged me a couple months later saying, hey, we've got this guy, Chris, and he's convinced us, he said the same thing as you. Let's go after solar. Are you interested in it? So it was like, yeah, let's talk. So
let's do it.
Yeah.
So you talked a little bit about the pressure or the reasons why companies are starting to look at this. I wanted to also highlight the problem, though, that it feels like you guys are specifically going after, and the way that you're going after this with without jumping ahead too far, but the smaller, being able to buy into the smaller chunks of that. Why don't you start to tee up this idea of where is the industry today? What would companies have to do today, and how are you guys making a different solution for them?
Yeah, the fastest way to do this is to put on-site solar on your rooftop. And put some storage on there, and have those electrons flow directly into your machines, your equipment, your AC system, your heaters. But every roof is different. You may not have enough rooftop space. There's complexity. These are 20-year, 25-year assets, so you got to put that on a building.
Own your building.
Own the building. You lease the building. So it gets super complicated. And so what we've come up with and what we are pitching is there's a better way of doing this. So instead of standing up that solar on your rooftop, we can stand it up much more cost effectively in a field that is connected to a grid, strategically in a grid, that really can take that energy. And we can do it in a grid that's dirty. So, you might be in Seattle and you might want to kind of, but you're 90+% hydro here. So if you want to have a climate impact, if you want to have a more effective, efficient way of putting up that solar at scale, we can do that. We basically virtualize the concept of on-site solar through our solar field. So, we've got a pretty compelling pitch here. A lot of big tech does this, and Michael knows this probably better than I. That Google's, Apple, they set up these virtual power purchase agreements to enable remote solar. They're now doing it 24/7, so it matches its load. So they've done that, but it's been Michael had stats. Just a couple hundred companies are actually doing that. There are thousands of other companies that would like to do the same thing Google and Apple and Microsoft are doing, but they don't have the scale. We can't customize it. And so that's what EverGreen's all about with our platform, to actually make that accessible to all of the companies out there, not just big tech.
Yeah, I think that, I think we're really trying to broaden the access, right? I think it's still just as we were trying to democratize the investment in solar, we're now trying to kind of democratize or broaden access to impactful products for companies that want to upgrading and really make sure that their money is going to accelerating the transition, that they're adding kind of more wood to the fire.
And just to talk about that scale difference, like what I was reading on your website was versus buying 25, I think, milliwatt hours, people are able to buy 5 milliwatt hours. Companies are able to buy that. Okay. Correct me. How's the best way to say that?
So you can get down to 1,000 megawatt hours is kind of our minimum. So 1 megawatt hour is about what a big house would use in a month. It's still a sizable company, right? We're not down to where, every company can participate, but I think it's much, much broader than the few hundred that are playing right now, where the minimum, these contracts they're long. They tend to be over 15 years long. They're very large. They tend to be for well over 250,000 megawatt hours. So we are 250th of that size as a minimum.
Right.
Ours are at least, our minimum 5 years instead of 15 years on ours. And they're risky and complex, right? The big players will spend months up to a year negotiating each of these contracts with each developer.
Wow.
And so we're trying to kind of standardize that and figure out if and find ways, and we have found ways to take out the risk of these for, again, broader participation. So again, finding the problems to address and then addressing those problems so that companies can participate and have the impact that they want to have, and then report on that impact and quantify it so they can be confident of it and kind of report back to their stakeholders, their investors, their customers, their employees, et cetera, and just kind of be really intentional and go really deep on that.
I think that's one important thing just to add on to under Michael's leadership is, we not only measure the megawatt hours, but we also kind of with our partner Watt Time translate that into a carbon impacts, like how much carbon are you reducing with your solar system or your storage system, and that is defined by a moment in time and location. So we measure that real time for our customers. So it allows our customers to kind of translate energy into carbon in a very real and meaningful way.
Yeah, and I think
that's a powerful marketing message for them, right? They're putting that out to shareholders, customers, et cetera, right?
I think it lets you be a more informed buyer. I think that there's a lot of inside baseball around carbon accounting and what's, how is this stuff supposed to work? How should it work? And so we could go incredibly deep on this stuff, and I don't advise us to. So I would just say we're not trying to sell this on the terms of the tons of CO2. I think that the way Scope 2 works, and I think we'll get a little bit into this, what is Scope 2 emissions, but really that is, the class of your emissions that comes from the energy you use, from the electricity you use, sorry, not energy, electricity.
Fair.
So, when you're trying to address your electricity, there's some, there's not 100% agreement about what is the, kind of best way to do that, or what's the right way to do that. Our perspective is going back to the point he made is you were looking at putting solar on site, right? And you couldn't do that for whatever reason. You couldn't afford it. You don't have enough surface area. You don't own the building. For whatever reason, that didn't make sense for you. You're doing this instead. We want it to be a good replacement in that you are putting solar into the world that wouldn't have happened otherwise. So that is kind of, for companies setting out these goals, we think that that's kind of your top-notch companies. And we think there's a lot of companies that want to have that impact, and it's just not accessible to them.
Not accessible,
yeah.
You brought this up a couple of different ways, and you guys talk about it on your website as additionality, which I dig. And I think you also talk about it in a different way of talking about your distributed network of solar fields. So you both brought that up in different ways. Let's blow that out a little bit more. What do you mean by additionality? And then, how are you doing that with this distributed network of solar fields?
Yeah. So additionality is one of my favorite climate terms. Especially, so additionality is really a term that has to do with, carbon markets historically. That's really what's come out of carbon offsets, carbon removals. And so the idea is if you are spending money to avoid emissions, which our projects are more or less, our position is that they're avoiding emissions. I wouldn't say they're reducing emissions in technicality, but you're either avoiding emissions, the question is, would those emissions have been avoided or reduced in terms of an offset, if not for that offset? right? So if a company is saying, hey, I'm polluting, right? I'm putting 1,000 tons of CO2 up in the air, but then I'm turning around and paying for this action over here, which is theoretically avoiding 1,000 tons of CO2 going up into the air. Was it truly avoided because of what I did? Or am I just taking credit for something that was already going to happen? In which case, spend your money somewhere else, right? We need it to actually be a net reduction, not you just trying to take credit because someone else didn't realize they had something of worth. So that principle of, the project, the thing that you're paying for wouldn't have happened if not for you contributing money to it. We're applying that principle to scope 2, which historically has not been applied. And I think that is a mistake. And I think partly because, it hasn't been cracked open how to apply it at scale. So when you're applying it to scope 2, it's to say, if you're spending money to make renewables happen, and you're doing that instead of putting, renewables on your roof or your facilities or whatever, we want to make sure the projects that your money is going towards are new, that no one else is taking credit for them, and that they wouldn't have happened if not for your involvement, your demand, your contribution, et cetera. There's other layers of additionality, and I'll avoid it. So I would say this is kind of the financial additionality. Test is a big part of kind of the way we look at it. But there are other aspects that go into kind of, quantifying the impact and really thinking about, so another good example is, the state doesn't have a renewable portfolio standard, which is an RPS. That's what states tend to have. Hey, we have this goal for this percentage of renewables. So there are other layers of other factors that could contribute to renewables happening, even if the finances don't work. Just because it's a new project, just because your money put it over the line, it might be that the law requires that project get built, and therefore it was going to get built anyway. So it's a complex, sometimes subjective thing, and I would say you can never be 100% sure. But I think what we can do is be, really intentional, really thorough, and really transparent about how we're trying to test and do our best to ensure that your money is truly making something happen in the world that wouldn't have happened otherwise. And only then are we building more than we otherwise would have. And only then are we actually accelerating the transition to renewables.
So that's awesome. And I appreciate that. And I love this idea of you're kind of, I've had this question in my brain for years now of what is carbon offsets? Just as a layman, just like, what do you mean by carbon offsets? Does that actually mean anything? Like, you're paying money into this like ephemeral unit of value. I don't really know what that actually did. I will say just learning a little bit about that concept of additionality has helped me, kind of peel back a little bit of this onion. I know there's a lot more to it, and you guys could probably go on it. But I also connected it on your website, and what you were talking about a minute ago, Chris, was this idea of these distributed network of smaller solar fields. I thought this was a really interesting concept, and I don't think it's always, but it feels like sometimes this additionality is one of these new potential distributed solar fields, smaller distributed solar fields. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think we're kind of onto something super interesting, and we're getting more and more interested, especially with this climate legislation that's played through. Is big utility scale projects. These are billion-dollar projects that take 3 to 5 years. They tie up thousands of acres of land. There's a lot of Wall Street money that kind of goes into that to stand those projects up. And the Googles and the Microsofts kind of, they're the ones kind of off taking, the PPAs, or you may have a utility off taking or a city, so sort of it's kind of the really big deals. On the other end of the spectrum, you got rooftop for, residential homes and businesses. And, those are very personal, like, that powers that home, that business, that, it's a big deal. But the challenge is it doesn't scale as much. You have to do 2,000 homes to, 1,000 homes to get to, start to kind of enter the utility scale world. And so what we have is sort of a Goldilocks project. We got something in the middle of that. So instead of a 100 kW or a 100 megawatt system, we have a 10 megawatt system. So it's kind of in the middle of those two. And we think it's pretty innovative because you can build them a lot faster. You can size them up to companies that are smaller than Google's and the Microsofts. You can also locate them on the distribution side of the grid. So You don't have to do on the transmission infrastructure. These are these big lattices that you see crossing the country that are, operating at 350,000 volts. And so you can do these at 13 kV or 35 kV, 35,000 volts. And it's a lot easier to connect into those projects. So the interconnection process is easier. So they're and a lot of these are kind of considered community solar projects. So these are sort of that size and ilk. I think what we have done is we've got a way to basically stand these up without having to go through a PPA or RFP process with the utility, which takes time and brings complexity to the equation. So what we're doing is we are locating those projects on the low voltage side of a substation. The substation is the device that basically steps down the voltage from transmission level infrastructure to distribution, which is the poles and wires that serve your homes and businesses in a city. And so that is a pretty strategic part of the grid, because that's where you take this massive sea of electrons and you start to feed it into circuits that supply power to homes and businesses. And by injecting right on the low voltage side where it touches the distribution system, there's still enough electricity to go into circuits so that if there's any intermittency from the renewable project, it doesn't get felt as much as if you have a solar at the end of that circuit or even on a rooftop per se. So it's a much better way to inject intermittent power into a system, and to do it at scale. So 10 megawatts, that's the equivalent of, I think roughly about 2,000 homes that can power. So what we do is we can, as long as we got land near a substation, we can lock up that land, we can build a solar farm, we can do the interconnection, and then we can basically wheel that power to a wholesale market and settle it financially. And from Michael's perspective, from the additionality perspective, there's not another claim of those electrons. Those electrons are basically being settled in the wholesale market, and the environmental attributes of that project can be fully supported by our off-takers. So when a customer steps up and signs up for one of those solar farms, it's their solar farm. They have made that solar farm happen, and it's pretty pure from that standpoint.
100% net new. 100% net new.
Yeah, well, it's not just that it's new. It's a cleaner call in that it's not, someone else isn't benefiting from it. Someone else didn't order it, right? So if someone else is building solar on their business and they don't care about the RECs, but they're benefiting from cheaper energy prices over time, did you really make that project happen, or would it have happened anyways? So that how do you quantify that? How you test for that is tricky, but that's kind of what we're getting at, is we avoid that, at least that part of it, by not building on, behind the meter. We're building where there's no other reason to have built other than our customers want it built.
Yeah. The only other thing I'd add on that, Ty, is if you put solar storage on there as well, which we've got in our plans as well, these become the power plants of the future. As the cities, fossil plants shut down, whether they're at the edge or remote, they're going to need power. They're going to need power locally, and we got to have more than just rooftop systems. And so these are going to be major power generation activities. And what we're trying to do, and this is under Ben Dixon's leadership, our chief legal officer, we're trying to standardize that. So it's Goldilocks, it's cookie cutter, it's standard contracts, and what we want to do is be able to stamp that out. Here's the playbook. There's 400 substations in the city. Let's stand these up across the city. Let's stand them up across the nation, and let's make this as cookie cutter and standardized as just going into a McDonald's and buying a Big Mac. Probably a terrible analogy, but it's like
no, I get it. And now you're starting to really talk like the startup language, which is a little bit more my comfort zone. I get where you're going with that, but a ton of innovation here as well, from what I can see. Like, just not as much like this happening, but this democratizing of this, the net new additional sources of energy. And then, of course, this distributed network all makes a ton of sense, at least to my startup brain, the startup side of my brain, where I'm getting that. And you guys, you mentioned already, so I want to jump ahead to this next piece, because you talked about connecting with Greg at Pioneer Square Labs. Obviously, a startup venture studio here in Seattle that is innovative. I mean, these guys are trying to stay, on that cutting edge of like what is next. And that's really what these startup studios, these venture studios get to actually try to do. But that being said, the venture capital market is the venture capital market. And so I'd love to hear, beyond PSL and those guys, how what have you guys learned about the money in this space from institutional investors? Who's looking at this? Do they have the savvy to talk about what you're talking about? Are they able to provide that value? If, say, someone else, interested in this space wanted to talk, is there enough VCs out there? Are you finding the appetite for this?
Yeah, it'll be interesting. Kind of, I don't think either one of us has been posed this question kind of together, so it'd be interesting to see the perspectives. We probably look. We're well funded with PSL, so I think we feel pretty good with PSL's commitment, and Greg is all in on this, and so we just had an offsite today with Greg all day, so it's just like
nice.
We feel the love from PSL and the commitment there, so we feel like we're very very, very lucky to have that. At the same time, we're going to need capital to scale this thing, and we want to have broad climate impact. So we are out there talking to the VC community, and I think a couple of things. One is we're talking to all the major players, and we're talking to decision makers here, and there's a ton of interest in us. I think, and so that's on the plus side. I think on the stuff that is a little bit of a surprise is a lot of VCs fall into two categories. If they're kind of a traditional, and Michael probably can answer this a lot more eloquently than I can. If they're on the traditional VC side, they're looking for kind of a software SaaS play or what a cloud play or whatever the latest du jour stuff is. If they're a carbon climate VC, what I've seen is they're really looking for a technology bet. They're looking for kind of a technology thing to solve this problem, and it's kind of they want the home run, that which is totally understandable for a VC. They make a lot of investments, they hit one home run, but I don't know if we're going to solve this problem with technology. Maybe someone gets a breakthrough,
or it's more of a we have the technology. Do we?
Well, that's the flip side. But
do we need new technology?
I'm just saying that VCs are very focused on I want to see the technology, the
cold fusion,
the widget,
like scalable carbon removal,
the silver bullet of a piece of tech that no one else owns.
Yeah. So I think that's kind of one interesting perspective there that I've seen on the VC side. The other is, we have these innovative projects, and that's more of a private equity play. That's going to be big checks, $100 million checks to scale that. And so we kind of sit in between kind of the VC and the private equity world. And so we're trying to figure that out. Like, do we shift more a little bit here? Do we shift more over here? How do we shape our story? We've got a very powerful story, but it's been an interesting ride. It's finding the right partner, I think, is going to be key for us.
Yeah.
I think the other piece is, there's a lot of pieces. I think that the economy and stuff has been shifting out from under us. There's times when you can raise money on a team. And I think we've got a fantastic team who could easily raise money on our team in the space you're in. Everyone's fighting over, who gets to fund, different teams. There's other times where VCs are a bit more, cautious. So I think that we've kind of gone from, because we're well funded, we went from not really talking to VCs, or we would, if somebody really wanted to talk to us, we'd talk to them and say, well, we're not really raising, but we're happy to kind of make an introduction. And, and then I think we've gotten a little bit more, serious about, let's talk to a few more and get a little bit more, but we haven't quite hit that, let's get really aggressive about this. And I think to some extent, our calculation has been, look, I could sell on a team, or I could sell on an idea and a vision. I'd rather sell on traction. And so we're closing some of our first sales. We're, working to build some of our first projects. And we just think that in general, don't take our word for it. Like, look at what we did, instead of look what we might do. We thought would be a better way to raise. And so, maybe, we'll see how that plays out, but I think that that's kind of been, and I think that that's, I think that some of the VCs at least, have appreciated that, of like, we'd love to talk, when you've made those, so many sales and you've built so many projects, or you've gone and I'm not having to take kind of as much of a bet, it'd be more interesting. But I think it is kind of between the VC and the project equity, or the private equity. And I think that, it's been interesting it's just, I mean, talking to any kind of investor has been interesting on this stuff, whether it's project investors or anything. And so I think I think it's going to take off. I feel really, bullish on it, and I think it'll be, um, easier as we've made a bit more traction.
No, that totally makes sense, and it takes a little bit of the, like you said, the bet out of it for any investor. So I just real quick, a quick follow up on the difference between private equity and VC. Have you seen a different kind of either sophistication around this or hunger around this in one market versus the other?
Yeah, I mean, I think
Size
the
of check is
VC.
the biggest.
What's that?
Size of check is the biggest.
Yeah, no, dev side of
Yeah,
checks is super different, but I think the VC's got a lot of sort of expertise around sort of technologies, and
yeah,
private equity more on project, how you scale projects. I think private equities are looking for something that is scalable, repeatable, kind of a model. They can write big
totally.
checks, and they just,
Yep,
here's the playbook. You just keep playing on it. And I think on the VC side, they are looking for, they're looking for the breakthrough,
Yeah.
and
that 10x, that
that
10x.
10x,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
I think we've got that as part of our story. But yeah,
Super, yeah, and
Yeah.
it's interesting that you were having to straddle both worlds, though. I
yeah,
think there is you shouldn't have to in a lot of ways, in my opinion. And again, this
uh,
goes back to like if you were to think forward of like an institutional investor. I mean, I think you guys bring up a really important piece of this, which is this problem may be solved by private companies like you guys, startups
mhm,
crushing this, but they're not going to solve it all with tech. We need
mhm,
potentially we need financing, we need funding, we need
mhm,
institutional investors to catch up to this concept that
mhm.
it's not one or the other.
Well,
And
and
so I'm
there's
kind of a yeah. Go ahead.
I mean, I think there's also business innovation and like legal
Yeah,
innovation. And I think there's, what is
yeah.
great design? Well, some of this is like about how you package and tell the story
Mhm.
and how you make it easy and
Interesting.
transactable. And I think that, you know, oh man, I had an idea now, I've forgotten it. I think that, um, this goes back to we started this company to have big impact, right? And I think that
Mm,
I've got, I know a lot of friends and stuff that have gone to work on climate, startups and stuff. And I think some of it is kind of that, Silicon Valley, tech bro mentality of like, I'm just going to software this, right? I'll build an app and I'm going to change the world. What I like about Evergreen is, we're trying to be really smart about, not like we're not trying to own the whole stack. We're trying to partner with those around us and find
mm,
something that scales and figure out what piece, where do we bring value. But we are not at all afraid of getting in the trench and kind of,
nice.
rubbing shoulders with our fellow, warriors and figuring out how to get stuff done, especially, when we can learn and kind of, better fine tune where we fit into all of this. So I think that is climate change is a real world problem.
Mhm.
You're not
Hmm.
going to fix it with charity. You're not going to fix it with just software. It's going to get into the hard sciences and the physical world, and so that is different than a straight up SaaS play, and it's different than crazy innovation that's got this massive IP moat around it with hard sciences around. I've got this way to do carbon removal, or I've got this way to do cold fusion, and so
Right.
we are here to scale up. The technology we need is here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it'll keep
Yeah.
getting
Yeah.
the innovation is will keep getting cheaper, and it'll keep scaling better. But we don't. It's here and it's good enough. We just need to scale the heck out of it. And so I'm trying to kind of take what I see as activity in the market and point it where it scales it even more.
I mean, I think it's a powerful observation. I mean, this
Mhm.
idea that there isn't a silver bullet in tech, and there's got to be some innovation across the board, and
Mhm.
it's a real world problem. I love that idea. So
Mhm.
thanks.
Team Earth, guys,
Team Earth.
right there, right. So the Inflation Reduction Act passed recently, right, and that seems to be a big deal. It might be the biggest climate bill passed on Earth as of world history. That's a big deal. You guys mentioned that we need to move faster to 100% renewable energy, and that means faster than current market trends and incentives. Faster
Yep.
than governments and the way current companies have been doing it. Why do we need to move faster?
I mean, we're still not on a path to net zero by 2050. Biden set out the goal of 100% renewable by 2035. We're still not on a path to that. And God help us if we actually got there sooner. That's not a bad thing. I think if I could like snap my fingers and have everything be running off of solar and wind, I think that'd be problematic. So I also think it's important not to be naive about this transition. Is more than just putting up a bunch of solar panels and wind farms. It's a fundamental changing of how the grid works and how you incentivize and reward kind of demand response. And there's a lot of facets to it, but we could be moving, and we need to move faster than we're moving. And the way I think about it, the other piece of it is, if you take broadly all of energy, so that's everything, so not just electricity, but all of energy, that everything we use to power everything that we use to run our lives, it's about 70% of greenhouse gas emissions. It is a massive piece of the pie. And so as we move to electrify everything from HVAC to cars to boats, to small aircraft, and eventually as we need to run more things on energy, like desalination, green hydrogen, direct air capture to like remove carbon out of the air, crypto, God help us. So as we are using more energy, per capita, because we're doing more with energy, as more of that energy is from electricity, we need to not only replace the generation we have, but we have to keep up with that new demand to make sure that it is renewables powering all those things, or the green hydrogen isn't green, right? Or the direct air capture is net negative, et cetera, et cetera. So the importance, and this is why I hit reset on I literally invested, almost 4 years into learning all about soil carbon and carbon markets, and basically hit the reset button, because energy is so much more important in my mind. It's not to say that other stuff isn't valuable and important, but the impact for every hour and every dollar spent, in my mind, is far greater in energy. And the importance of it is just paramount. If we don't get this done, nothing else matters in my mind. Nothing else is going to make up for it. So this is just a critical piece.
Yeah, just a couple of things I think are important. One is velocity does matter in this whole climate fight. The more every year we delay this, it's a nonlinear impact on climate, and we're already seeing 500-year floods in Texas like every other year. It's like these 100-degree. I was down in Texas last week. It's like this summer's just been brutal. It's getting off the rails, so to speak. Even Seattle here a year ago, we had this 1 in 1,000-year heat dome where you had temperatures up here of 110. It's just like saw plants actually start to burn. It's like, we got to do it faster, because if we don't, the problem just gets worse and worse. And so I think that's one thing. I think the second thing I want to emphasize Michael's point, there's carbon capture, extraction, all sorts of technology out there. We got a bathtub overflowing with water, and we can try to take water out with tablespoons, or we can just turn off the faucet. And that is what we're trying to do. If we can turn off a fossil plant, if we can reduce the run, from a baseload plant, coal plant, to something that's not running at mid load, it's like every time we reduce the megawatt hours from fossil, we have a huge impact, and it's measurable, and it's accurate, and the technology's here today. And so why not move faster on this thing, and why not get to 100% renewables? And I'm a utility guy. I'm realistic as well. I think to get to 70-80% is very, very doable. That last 20-30% in terms of making sure you address intermittency across all sorts of situations, the tail events, that's going to be hard. You're going to need long duration storage, but we can certainly be much, much higher. And so we want to put a bold goal out there around 100% renewables as fast as we can, 2030 if we can. So that's the most immediate, obvious impact we can have in this climate fight. And with this legislation that's come through, it feels like now the government is partnering with the private sector to make that happen. I mean, it feels like we can get to 40% reduction by 2030, and that's huge.
Finally, in a big way. Yeah.
I think, one of my favorite, Larry Page at Google once said internally, sometimes it's easier to do the thing that's 10x, more audacious, because it just fundamentally shifts your mindset to start thinking about doing it at that scale. And I think that as, a species, we have shown our ability to do great things in a short amount of time. I mean, you go like one of the biggest I think of is, my God, how much we moved, mountains during World War II, and how much we built up our manufacturing capabilities, and we're turning out. And so I think climate, it's this slow moving. It's like, you're the frog or the lobster in the pot of water that's slowly boiling. And so the urgency doesn't, feel as great, but I do think it's that level. And I think, we are capable of moving faster, and we just want to be part of that.
And I think individuals know, or they're starting to know more, why they need to buy renewable energy. Why do companies need to buy renewable energy? Michael, we posed this question to you leading up to this conversation. I feel like you had some really nice thoughts and answers around that, because in some way at the moment it is voluntary.
So, I mean, this is broadly like, why does a company have net zero goals? Why does a company think about their emissions? Why does it measure? Why does it try to do something about them? And the truth is, the only way to buy renewable energy, to truly buy it, to have those electrons, is you build something on site. Anything else, even if you're buying it through a green tariff program with your utility, there's no way to guarantee the actual electrons you got. It's like a big bathtub of electricity. And you put some, apple juice in the bathtub, and then you pulled out a cup of water and you said, I got 100% apple juice. Well, so the best you can do is put in a cup of apple juice and take out, and say, okay, it's, I put in a cup, I took out a cup, and I know that, it kind of, but sorry, my theory on why companies care, why do companies do anything about this, is I think it's like one of four reasons. So one is they care because they see the risk to their business, right? They see that, like, gosh, if we don't do something about this, my business isn't going to continue to flourish, whether it's, travel, or whether it's, other things. Maybe they own, I think there's a number of examples where just companies really see, and I think the SEC is requiring them to start reporting on, or is petitioning to start reporting on the risk to their business, to better understand that, so investors can understand that. So I think it's paramount to them continuing to exist as a company and be profitable. Okay. I think the second is maybe it's not paramount to their business, but the founders or the leadership in the company just straight up cares. They say, like, this is important. This is kind of team Earth, right? And so we're going to do our part. We're going to actually look at how are we, while we aren't regulatory required to consider the cost of, a kind of pollution, we're going to go ahead and track it. We're going to do something about it. And that's a growing trend of a lot of companies, really trying to understand that, quantify what's their footprint of their business across different layers, indirect and direct, and do something about that. I think another is they feel pressure. So maybe leadership doesn't really care or give 2 cents, but this is where individuals, I think, the big thing individuals can do is, as I like to say, is A, they can just talk about it. A lot of people don't even talk about climate change to their friends and family, coworkers. B is, vote about it. And C is, push, anyone around you that you can care about it, really. So I think that when companies feel pressure from their customers, when they feel pressure from their employees, when they feel pressure from their investors, all that stuff adds up to pressure that they eventually feel like they have to act on, and it just becomes part of status quo. And I think the last kind of interesting one is sometimes companies are just trying to avoid regulation. They're trying to self-regulate before they get regulated. I think Corsia and the ICAO, with all the airlines with international travel, is an example of possibly that. And again, I don't know that that's what it is, but like my theory is they're trying to say, hey, don't give me rules. We're taking care of this. Don't worry about it. And then they get to kind of set those rules themselves before governments set it for them.
So what I heard there a little bit was we got to start pressuring more companies to do this, because if they start hearing from us more, they want to buy in some way. So the last piece of the puzzle that I want to explore with your product, EverGreen, and this idea, I believe it's in the VPPA, in how companies actually can start to buy into this. So talk to us a little bit about how do companies get more access to buying renewable energy via EverGreen and the VPPA process?
Let me take a first cut at it, even though this is probably more Michael's space. What we're selling is this concept of additionality. Your project, your support, your investment is making a difference, is standing up as if it were happening on your rooftop. for better or for worse, this concept of VPPA has gotten out there as that's the way to make that happen. That's what Google and Microsoft have done. And so, there's a lot of interest, and that's kind of what, we have that product available to our customers. We also find that product is pretty complicated. You're taking some market exposure risk there based on kind of whatever wholesale market you're selling into. The Googles and the Microsofts of the world, they can handle that. They can have full energy staff to kind of model where ERCOT is going, or and so they can manage that. I think what we have found is, like, part of our innovation is if we can bring a forward contract commitment to that project. If it's a VPPA, we're all for it. We can do it. We can man it, but there might be easier ways of doing it. Maybe it's a collared VPPA where it's tightly collared, where you've got a lot less exposure on the up and down. Maybe it's even a fixed price VPPA. Like it's still a virtual power purchase agreement, but it's fixed price. And that, and so, we're trying to kind of walk that. We're trying to make this as easy as possible, because what we don't want to do is have someone be enamored, like, I want a VPPA because that's what I heard Google has. Then they go in there and then they take it to their CFO and they say, well, we're not going to be forecasting energy prices. You're crazy. Let's get this out of here. Right. And so we lose the ball on that. So I think we've been trying to simplify it. And while we are still super excited about the VPPA concept, we're also super excited about simplifying that as a way, like, just make a forward commitment to that project. It could even be a REC purchase agreement where you're buying the environmental attributes in a meaningful way and you're standing up that project, a fixed VPPA, a collared VPPA, but we're trying to simplify that in a very meaningful way so that we can sell the additionality, but we don't get stuck in the complexity and jargon that's out there right now.
You mentioned at the end of that a REC, which is a renewable energy certificate or a renewable energy credit. Sometimes those are used interchangeably, but a REC is really at the core of all this. And so we see, and that's largely, there's over 110,000 companies that spend money in some way to address their scope 2 emissions. So again, the indirect emissions from energy, from the electricity, not energy, but electricity that they use. So buying RECs from a broker is by far the number one way that companies do this. And those are typically pretty cheap. They're typically on the order of $1 to $3 per REC. And so think about it this way. If it cost you $100,000 to build solar on site, a big on a big warehouse or building or something, but instead you could go get that same impact, quote unquote, and somewhat this is my words or my kind of thinking. I think how companies think about it is they're interchangeably. Instead of doing that, I'm just going to go buy 1,000 RECs or 5,000 RECs. It's going to cost me $10,000 a year. Like, how on earth did something that was, hundreds of thousands of dollars or $100,000, was it the same as just spending, $5,000 a year? How are those equitable? And so something smells kind of funny. And I think the defenders of RECs would say, well, that's not really how RECs are supposed to work. So the theory of RECs is so basically the way it works is every time 1 megawatt hour of clean energy is delivered to the grid, the grid operator will issue a single REC. So 1 REC equals 1 megawatt hour of clean energy delivered to the grid. And it is, they are the sole kind of entity for issuing those. So there's not double issuances, not double counting. And then those RECs can be sold. Now, originally this was built up for compliance, right? States say we need this many clean energy, this many megawatt hours of clean energy being generated. So this was kind of stood up to count those and make sure that we are tracking towards those goals. And I think they work for that. But then they kind of started getting, so when states started meeting their goals, as Texas did, they set a low goal and they met it years ago. And they have no intention, I don't think, of setting a new one. Those RECs then flood kind of the voluntary market, where companies are voluntarily, this is all voluntarily, wanting to kind of clean up their emissions. And so, hey, I'll buy some RECs and I can get them. And we've talked to companies they boast, hey, this year I got them for $2. I'm really excited. Got them for even less, right? They're trying to spend as little as they can. It's an added cost. It's a voluntary action. Why wouldn't they try to spend as little as they can?
Sure.
Problem is, when they get that cheap, and it's why are they so cheap, right? Is it because of their oversupply or lack of demand? Is it because developers aren't asking for enough? Like for some reason, there's a lot of RECs that are very cheap, and when the RECs are that cheap, And we go in and look at those projects, and we've looked firsthand at projects, that were the RECs represent less than 0.5% of the overall financing cost. They're usually sold up front to a broker. So the RECs aren't getting it done. And so these long-term contracts, right, a virtual power purchase agreement or a REC purchase agreement, the whole thinking or the whole math behind it, there's tons of research and why is that impactful and just buying RECs in the spot market not, is because if it is a long-term commitment to a project yet realized for a significant enough price, the project will literally take that long-term commitment to the bank, to the investor, and say, hey, I have this extra stream of income that's going to boost my returns or make sure I can cover my loan payments. And now will you finance my project? And the way we test this is we literally have taken projects to those investors or banks and said, will you fund it without the sponsorship? And they've said, no, the returns aren't high enough. The risk is too great. And we see the risk at defaulting to be too great because there are soft years when energy prices are lower. So that is kind of our way of testing for this contribution is needed, is impactful. And so you bring this long-term commitment at, maybe the REC is quite a bit more. It might be $20 a REC. But a long-term, a 5-year, a 10-year commitment to buy at $20, that I can use to fund a project that wasn't going to happen otherwise. And so it's a different way of getting RECs that truly stands up projects. And that is kind of our bread and butter. And then we're trying to kind of think around where can we make things better for anyone around that table and any way around these projects, right? How do we let landowners co-invest and own some of the equity in the project if they want to benefit from it? We let, there's tax credits that are now going to be easier to monetize, and we might let companies, make more money off the projects in that way. So we're kind of looking for how, I've got a bunch of people around a table from the utility, the company, the landowner, the developer, all of the utilities customers, right? How can we be thoughtful? And if we can make things better for everyone around that table, truly stand up projects and address, what a company's really the impact they're trying to have in the world. We think that is an idea worth having.
Super interesting. I mean, just, again, I love that we built off this idea of additionality, and then of course more access, more ways, and getting creative with these. I don't mean to oversimplify them, but seem like financial vehicles for companies to get into this world. I mean, I think it goes back to your original premise of more access, right? This is what we need. We need more companies who can have more ways to access this. And then the last piece is more access to actual renewable energies, which is the additionality, which I love. Super good, guys. Hey, Jacob, I think it's time, man.
It's time. So we're gonna wrap up here, guys. We're gonna do something we like to do called rapid mayhem questions. He's gonna be directed at Chris over here. So they're around renewable, clean energy space. And Michael, feel free to jump in and provide any color since you already looked at the cheat sheet of true or false answers. So it's true or false.
You provided.
Yes. So Chris, are you ready?
Yes.
All right. Okay. True or false? Renewable energy creates 4 times more jobs than fossil fuels.
I mean, I'd say it depends. I just straight up, I'd say that's false. But it really depends. I mean, again, if I look at it sort of a coal plant, or gas, you've got 100 employees there operating that plant. If you look at a solar farm, it's you might have an employee checking in on it remotely. But if you're talking about the entire vertical, if you're now starting to manufacture panels and storage devices and batteries here, and all the ancillary services around the solar, so I think it really depends on what we're talking about here. If it's just more the power facilities themselves, or if it's the full value chain.
Okay. It is true, but great context when it comes to exclusively coal and gas, excluding oil. That number is 5 to 1. And then Michael, I feel like you got something to add here.
Yeah, I had some. Okay. I dug in this a little bit because my knee-jerk reaction is what Chris's was like. I don't know, maybe it seems like it would depend, and I think that really it's a 4 to 1 or 4x for what, right? 4x, does that mean per plant, per megawatt hour, per dollar invested? And so I saw some research on for every $1 million the United States, and I don't know if this is the government puts into it. It was about 2.7, 2.8x. So there is,
wow.
there is a multiplier there for every dollar the government spends. And so if you're thinking of what is the government investing in, not just from a clean energy and climate perspective, but from a job creation standpoint, it seems like renewables are the way to go.
Yep.
Wow.
All right.
Nice. I love that color.
All right, on to the next one. All right, true or false? Renewable energy sources generated 20% of global electricity in 2021.
Again, does this include hydro or?
This includes hydroelectric, solar, wind, biomass, and geothermal.
So not nuclear.
Yeah.
Not nuclear.
Yeah, I would say at least that much.
Yeah.
All right, that's true. So it is true. And it actually surpassed the amount of energy produced from coal, which stopped at 36.5% in the same year, in 2021, despite seeing a rise. All right, great. Number 3, true or false, all renewables are getting cheaper except offshore wind?
I think that's historically been certainly the case. You look at solar, it followed a sort of, a declining cost curve, battery storage. I think recently with supply chain issues, I think, we've seen a leveling, maybe even increase in some of the costs there. So I think historically, yes, absolutely, they've gotten cheaper. I think here over the past year or two, they've gotten more expensive.
Okay. Yeah. And the stat I pulled was from 2020. It's actually false. It's that all renewables, including offshore wind, have gotten cheaper.
That was going to be my question. Why isn't offshore wind getting cheaper too? Maybe labor. Certainly, it's probably
hard. A trick question?
It was a trick question.
You guys are too smart. I'm trying to trick you a little bit. All right. Last question, true or false? Every hour, the sun beams enough solar energy onto Earth to keep everyone on our planet supplied with electricity for an entire year. True or false?
I'd definitely say that's a true statement.
Okay.
At least if that's, I've heard a stat like that in some way.
Yeah,
that's true. That's true.
I think the interesting, I feel like it's absolutely true, but it's also like, it somewhat misleads as to how easy it is, right? Like, I think it's a great eye-opening, but like, it makes it sound like, well, this is so easy. Like, it's there for an hour. Like, why not? And just it kind of goes back to, distributing that energy, storing it, when it's not, et cetera, are the challenges, upon us. And so, yes, the energy is there for the taking, but our ability to utilize it is, it's not a cakewalk. It's there to be had.
That's right. It's part of the challenge. All right, Rav Mayhem questions complete.
Nice job, guys.
The chamber has
you added a lot of color to those. I like it.
That's good. All right, guys, it's been so fun. Last thing, climate change is so big, and people often feel helpless in taking action. You guys are involved in a B2B play. It sounds really promising. How can the average consumer play into this? Someone listening.
Yeah, look, we started a little bit of as a B2C play. We may come back to that idea. Like, we want to make all dollars available to this energy transition. The B2B obviously is the space we're focusing, but I think there's opportunities in the B2C, in the consumer play, that we'd like to get back to. But I would say, just being engaged on the dialogue and leaning into this and doing everything you can to reduce your carbon footprint. I mean, there's just, with this climate legislation that's come through, I mean, there's huge tax incentives to electrify your homes or your business, to go to a heat pump, to replace natural gas, to put solar on your roof, to put geothermal. I've got geothermal at my house.
Wow.
And so, I think there's just a lot of opportunities. Consumers can basically financially make, really good investments in their own homes and businesses to reduce their carbon footprint.
And I think the key there is that it is a financially beneficial, and you should crunch the numbers and make sure for your situation that it makes sense. Like, I was excited to buy an electric car, but I waited till my previous car was 20 years old and needed to be replaced. I think that it's easy to get into, I'm doing this because of climate. And I actually think that is the wrong reason to spend money on this stuff. I think that you do it. So I have my own kind of personal pet peeve around this, around kind of putting, and you even look at the history of, carbon footprint. And some of that is out of BP doing some stuff and trying to kind of point the finger at the consumer and say, this is on you. And it's your responsibility to take care of your footprint. And that is, there's a whole bunch of, I think, problems with that. So I have, look, my house has got solar on it. I've got an electric car. I've got an electric, I'm a vegetarian, all these things. I don't do these things because I think my decisions, I am one of 7 billion people are going to like save the earth. Um, I do it because I think it's good to support the companies trying to put those solutions out there to help show them that customers care, to help them stand up their businesses and those solutions so that they get cheaper and eventually they are just a better option for everyone else. And I do it because I think it's a great conversation starter and it's a good way to signal to those around me that the house is on fire, right? Like if you see smoke in the distance, you might go, I wonder what that is. I wonder if it's like a, campfire. Is that just some steam? Maybe it's not even smoke. I don't know. If you see someone hauling butt next to you with a bucket and a hose, you realize there's something's wrong. And you either run away or you run towards it, depending on, kind of your default, thoughts on that. So I think that, signaling to those around us, having conversations, voting, pressuring, when you can, and don't do it to assuage guilt. Don't have guilt, right? I mean, I think it's great to care about your footprint. Don't be wasteful. Just like you don't litter, right? Like you try to recycle when you can. Don't be gratuitously wasting of energy. Turn off the lights at night. Use LED bulbs. Do smart things, of course. But like, don't like. There's no value in feeling like just a boatload of guilt about like taking a flight to see grandma. And saying, my God, that was 12 tons of CO2, and how am I going to offset? I got to buy offsets. I think a lot of offsets are sold around this guilt. I think, I don't buy, I have bought offsets in the past. I don't buy them now. I think doing it around kind of for the other reasons, I think is, either financial benefit or to, stand up companies you care about that are selling solutions that you think are important, or to just have conversations with people about climate change.
Yeah, I mean, I just have to say that's a super unique and interesting perspective, and it really backs up what we're doing here.
Yeah,
we're we're talking to companies that are doing this for profit. We've made that clear because lots of people talk to nonprofits or governmental organizations or even B Corps, but we're trying to talk to the people who are doing this in the innovative, VC startup, whatever funded world. And I think what you said makes a lot of sense. One of the questions we're kind of playing with is this idea of, do you spend, how should we spend this dollar? How do we spend our dollars? Should we be spending our dollars here? And what you said is, don't do it out of guilt. Do it out of support. Do it because you believe the house is on fire and you want to figure out your way to run towards it and help out. I like that.
Yeah. And look, we appreciate y'all giving us a platform to tell our story. I think it's important that more people, more companies connect into this. I mean, we're not going to. There's not any single technology that's going to solve this problem. A single company, Google, Microsoft, not going to solve this. It's going to take all of us. So we really appreciate the conversation here.
Yeah,
we appreciate it too.
Well,
guys.
we appreciate you coming. I mean, the innovative approaches you guys are taking to this, even just the pure mission of trying to provide more access and putting more renewable energy is super interesting to us. And thanks for that.
Guys, thanks so much for taking the time and sharing. Your passion's contagious. I mean, I feel like Ty and I are even more zealous about this whole thing, and for just doing what you guys are doing. Like you guys are both pretty established already in your careers, and this is something that there are still a lot of people that are so polarized that this is not even real, right? And that's like in some way working at a company and you guys leading a company is really brave. So I just want to thank you on that too.
I appreciate it, Jacob.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And, for any companies out there, we're at www.ever.green and, just connect with us. We'd love to talk to y'all.
I think we're always looking for, other people to partner to, kind of 1 + 1 = 3, or if you're a company that's looking to address your emissions, kind of in a high integrity way, like we'd love to talk to you, and we can, we're happy to say, hey, look, our solution isn't the best solution. And actually one customer we pointed them at onsite. We said, you should talk to our developers directly and build solar onsite. That's going to be better for you. So we really do take that kind of Team Earth mentality, to heart, where we're trying to help everyone do the best they can. And we think we've got something great for a lot of companies. And we'd love to talk to more about that.
So you told us what companies should do. What about us as consumers? Which company should we be pushing your way? How do you talk to people? Like what's your target audience in the company world that we should be bugging to
Yeah.
know more about EverGreen?
It's usually the sustainability officers, if there is one. In some companies, I would say if you're at a company that doesn't have a sustainability officer, we've talked to a couple of small companies. I'll give a shout out to Figma, which is one that's near and dear to my heart as a designer, and I know the head of design there. They've got a couple engineers. They don't have a head of sustainability. They have a couple engineers that took it upon themselves to kind of start a club around it and eventually petition the finance team to give them budget to spend on some of this stuff. So they're kind of, bootstrapping it, if you will, from inside.
Yeah.
So
internal activists. I love it.
absolutely.
I love it.
So I think that, whether it's the company you're at or, I think it's hard to, like, what are you going to do? Walk into, Walmart and say you should go buy, a long-term contract of energy from, like, it's hard to kind of get in. But if you know people at these companies, or if you're at a company yourself, I think, pushing for those are this, sustainability team, sometimes the finance team, usually the sustainability team often will roll up through the finance team. And we have products that are purely around, look, we've got, like, the tax credits are a great example of, it's not about buying renewable energy. It's just about, you can contribute money and make a little bit of money and help these projects get stood up. You're not getting RECs out of it, but you make a little bit of money on it and you're helping kind of contribute to, the acceleration. So finance team, sustainability team, those tend to be the teams that we tend to talk to, but happy to talk to anyone or start, with anyone who's just curious about it. Some of our conversations have started out of people I know in my network that are like software engineers. I just want to work on climate. And I'm like, that's awesome. And here's how I think about that and what you could do. But you could also, put us in touch with people at the company you're already at. Let's see if, we can get some impact done where you're at.
That's a great call out.
You don't have to change your career to have impact.
Yeah. It's a story.
And tell us the website one more time. It was a unique one.
Ever.green. So .green instead of .com. So it's just Ever.green.
Ever.green. That's catchy. Guys, thanks so much.
All right.
All right, guys. Thanks, guys. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Bye-bye.
Boom. How was that? Well, there's more. So keep listening. We speak with climate tech leaders and change makers in EV, reforestation, solar energy, flood mapping, and a whole lot more. Also, you can give feedback or check out show notes at our website, climatemayhem.com. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.
Oh, don't forget, if you found this valuable or interesting at all, please hit subscribe. That way we know you're loving it. So just go to Spotify or whatever podcast app you're on, hit that subscribe button at the top. Production was done by Daniel Steenkamp with cover art by Harrison Glenn. This is Jacob Kubica with my legendary colleague, Ty Wolf motherfucking Jones. Peace out, Climate Mayhem. Out.